Despite not having any lines or really any individually discernible personalities, Gamorrean guards are some of the most memorable characters from Jabba's palace, partially because of their very distinctive appearance. They are green humanoid pigs, after all. But also they appear in lots of scenes as Jabba's bodyguards and enforcers, and they're definitely a fan-favorite character as well. Even the Rancor loves them. Someday I'd love to do a whole retrospective about the Gamorrean Guard as a character, but today is not that day. Honestly, I'm still kind of recovering from the video I made about Bib Fortuna, but given that Regal Robot is releasing their new Gamorrean Guard concept Maquette replica, I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about the creation of the Gamorrean Guard as a character. I've talked about the Creature Shop from Return of the Jedi many times on the channel in the past. That's, of course, where they created all of the amazing aliens that we saw in Jabba's palace and elsewhere in the film. And this whole process of how you can start with just a simple sketch or a statue and then work from that to figure out how you can make a complex, fully articulated costume or puppet is just fascinating to me. For the more minor aliens in the film, they had quite a free creation process. It's very interesting. In fact, I've described it a number of times on the channel in the past, so why don't I let Dave Carson, who is one of the people who worked in the Creature Shop at the time, explain it to you as he did in this interview with Tom Spina from Regal Robot.
It was kind of pie in the sky, just whatever you want to sculpt, make up something, sculpt it. And about once every week or two, George would come by and look at the maquettes we had done, and the ones he liked, he'd put a red sticker on them. And we would then start building those ones for real.
So they were given an extraordinary amount of freedom, although the final arbiter was, of course, George Lucas, who made the decision about what was used and what wasn't, or what changes might need to be made. For key characters like the Gamorrean Guard, however, they had a bit more regimented process where they started with a concept that already existed and then tried to flesh that out using two-dimensional sketches like these and then moving on toward maquettes and statues to figure out what they should look like in 3 dimensions. It was around this stage when Phil Tippett asked Dave Carson to take over as sort of the lead of the Gamorrean Guard project.
We had so much that had to be done. That's why he asked me if I would take over the pig guards. So I had designed the maquette for the pig guards, and we had to build 3 of them, plus an animatronic head and a stunt head.
Right.
So Phil asked me, would I just take over the pig guards and do that? So I said,
okay. Through.
So that became my focus after a while.
In addition to the Star Wars films, Mr. Carson was also involved in the production of many films that were influential for me as a child growing up in the 1980s. My understanding is that Mr. Carson not only made several maquettes, including this standing full-bodied one, but he also went on to make the final full-sized one that was turned into the costumes for the Gamorrean Guard. So I think, more than anyone, he can be credited with the creation of the Gamorrean Guard as a character on screen. But the first physical version of the character that really resembles what we know as the Gamorrean Guard today is this maquette, which you can see here. You can even see George Lucas's red sticker there that Dave Carson mentioned. And this is the one that Regal Robot chose to recreate for their concept maquette replica. And here we have the actual concept maquette replica. The first thing that really struck me when I took this out of the box was how big and heavy it is compared to many of the other archive collection maquettes I have in my collection. It's on a large piece of wood, about 5.5 inches square. So, when you have that kind of depth, it is actually, pretty big. And it's probably about, I didn't measure it, but 7-ish inches tall, I'm thinking. I understand it's about 3 pounds in weight, so it's a lot of wood and resin. So pretty chonky, as they say, which is appropriate enough for a Gamorrean Guard, I think. But yeah, it definitely has a presence to it. Now, there are a couple things about this that are a little bit different from some of the other maquettes that we've had in the archive collection. One is that there's some obvious damage to it, in the sense that the original piece in the Lucasfilm archives has some damage to it, and they were left, Regal Robot was left with the decision of, how do we handle that? Do we try and restore it back to the way that it was when it was presented to George Lucas, or do we want it to be exactly the way it is today? I asked Tom Spina of Regal Robot about their philosophy that they use for these kind of things, and he basically said that it's kind of a case-by-case basis. It depends on the piece. But for this one in particular, for example, if you look here, there is a thing here, just a little bit of a remnant of where it used to be. But there was a hook here on his shoulder armor that somewhere along the line got knocked off, broken. You can see it in this photo here that's in the Star Wars Chronicles book. And I asked Tom about this, and I was curious what their position was about this, because they do, you do have the knowledge that this was on the original, and you even have a photo of it. Should you try and recreate it, or should you go with what is in the archive right now? His answer was that even though they did have a picture of it, they didn't really have a good enough reference to be able to recreate it, and they were reluctant to just kind of make something up, which I totally understand. And I think that makes sense. At the same time, there are, I guess, some cases where, for example, even on this piece, I don't know where it was on the piece, but he said that there was a section of the armor that had been broken off, maybe here, I don't know, and it looked pretty bad. It had been repaired somewhere along the line a few years ago, but, they decided that it would look better to smooth that over just a little bit, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. But they did leave, for example, if you look on the back of this, there's a ragged edge here where bits of the, I guess, outside, I think this was made with Sculpey clay, it had just kind of gotten knocked around or something, and bits had chipped off, and they've kept that, and I kind of like that. It gives it a little bit of character, and if anything, it's sort of a conversation starter, because you can talk about how this is not just a decorative statue of a Gamorrean, but it is in fact something that was used in the production of the film, and it's actually the first, or one of the first iterations of this character, or this alien species anyway. One other thing to talk about is the paint. Now, on the paint front, I think this is actually pretty interesting, because if you look at the photo that I showed you earlier from the Star Wars Chronicles book, but the paint looks pretty bad. It looks like it's been chipping away. It looks kind of like it may have changed color a little bit or something over the years and been worn off in other places. But as someone who's been collecting statues and figures for many years and been taking pictures of them all that time and looking at other people's pictures online, I know that the lighting in particular can really affect how a paint job looks, and I think maybe that's a little bit of what we're seeing here. In fact, I did ask Tom Spina about this, and he said that this picture here from another book was closest to what he had seen in person in terms of the way the paint job actually looked, and that is pretty close to what we got on the actual replica as well. Tom did also mention that their approach with the paint jobs is less to try and replicate every single brush stroke exactly as it was on the original, and more to try and evoke the feeling that the original paint job had. And judging from the photo that he mentioned was close to the original, I think they did a great job on that. The paint job is a little bit rougher looking than many of the other maquettes that they've made, but I think doing it this way actually really looks very cool and brings out the character that this piece actually has. It reminds me a little bit of a watercolor painting in some ways, where you have this inconsistent coloration. It's actually pretty cool. Speaking of watercolor paintings, by the way, this one here, as many of the other maquettes have, comes in 2 editions, one of which is the normal signature edition that comes with the signature of Dave Carson, who sculpted this, as I mentioned earlier in the video. But in addition to the signature edition, they also have a legacy edition available. The legacy edition of all of these maquettes, basically the idea is they have the maquette itself, of course, but you also get a unique piece of artwork drawn or painted by the person who was responsible for this maquette back in the day. I've had several of these in my collection, and I really enjoy them all. This one is definitely no exception. It's very impressive looking, and I'll bring it out right now. This is, as you can see, an actual watercolor painting here of the Gamorrean holding his axe. Well, you can't see him holding it, but it's, up in front of him here. I really think this is well done. I really like, first of all, watercolors just in general for their aesthetic, but I think he's done a great job here getting all the colors like this. And, when you think about the connection that the maquette has to the character, and also that this artwork has to the actual creator of the maquette, it seems, a lot more special than just a signature would be, although we do also have his signature here, of course. So I'm really happy with this. I can add it to my growing collection of Legacy Edition Archive Collection maquettes. Yeah, that's pretty much it. This is going to be available as I publish this. Basically, it's available on the 3rd of September at noon. The signature edition is going to be limited to 125 pieces, and will of course include the signature plaque and the maquette itself. That will be $549. And the Legacy Edition, which you see here, which will include a unique piece of artwork, not this one, this is mine, but, they actually had Dave Carson make 60 unique paintings of the Gamorrean Guard, which I think is awesome. That costs $849 and is limited to just 60 pieces. With the Legacy Edition in particular, I expect that to go pretty quickly. There are a lot of Gamorrean Guard fans out there, and I think this is definitely one of the more impressive Legacy Edition pieces of artwork. So if you're interested, definitely don't sleep on it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this look at the creation of the Gamorrean Guard character, and this review of Regal Robot's recreation of the first sort of physical version of the character in the form of their concept maquette replica. I will, of course, put links to the product pages for that in the video description, and I'll also put a link to the full interview that Tom Spina did with Dave Carson. That was sort of in the context of their creation of the 9-num concept maquette replica, but he talks about the Gamorrean Guard as well, and just generally about his career and his experience working on Return of the Jedi. I found it very fascinating. It's over an hour long, so pretty in-depth, but very, very enjoyable indeed. Thanks very much for watching.